Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from Hudson Lee, Reflex Angle. Alright, this is one I was pretty hyped for. Hudson Lee is one of the co-founders of the label Upscale, and a name I reference quite frequently is among the forefront of these kinds of modern bass music and IDM artists who have, really sonically complex styles alongside plenty of others ranging from Frequent, Coma Duster, Coan Sound, False Noise, Elon Moore, Aleph, Sakura Burst, etc. In 2019, this guy dropped his debut album Headspaces, and that's undoubtedly a project that's stuck in my mind longer term. I already marked it as my second favorite album of that year and one of my favorites of the entire 2010s decade. I rated it an 8.7 out of 10 a few months after it came out, and at this point it may have pretty handily crossed over into 9 range for me. It put a more low-key, songwriterly spin on this style that I'd never seen before or since, feeling a lot more personal and intimate, especially thanks to the near-constant presence of Guessing or La Sapatique, though it also felt like the first project I'd come across where the upscale sound started to feel more like one big unified community, with several other producers and guests coming together to join in on the experience and combine their style with Hudson's, yet still all coming together really cohesively. The kind of project that had me really excited for the future of this whole genre. Needless to say, when he announced this sophomore album here, I was pretty hyped. Though, right from the moment when I saw the track listing, I knew it was not going to be the same experience. First of all, it looked to be a much tighter listen with only 12 tracks in comparison to Headspace's 16 tracks. Not to mention, there were only 3 tracks here with guest features, in comparison to Headspace's, which I think had 3 tracks without guest features. I mostly stayed away from the pre-album singles to avoid spoiling myself, but the bits I did hear weren't too far away from the instrumental material from his last album or any number of other projects from his label mates or other artists in this genre. It seems that Hudson has seen fit to do the opposite of the name of the label he co-founded, and downscale. Go for something a lot less ambitious and lower stakes. Though there is certainly a different challenge posed by this album's conceit in having to focus so much more purely on his own style without any outside help, and whether he can get that to work for a whole album. Granted, even if I knew this album almost certainly was not going to be nearly as good as Headspace's just from its smaller scope, I didn't have any doubts that I'd still at least really enjoy it, since Hudson has already proven that his core style is the kind of thing that'd be right up my alley. And yeah, Reflex Angle turned out to be exactly what I expected it to be. There may be nothing here that really shocked or surprised me, but I didn't particularly mind that either. I knew what I was gonna get going into it, and I got it. Honestly, while there's nothing this album does that I haven't heard before several times, either from Hudson himself or any number of his contemporaries, Reflex Angle does stand out to me for possibly being, the least pretentious entrant into this genre to date, at least that I've heard. Most projects in this style are doing everything they can to impress you with their sound design and often attach their ideas to big, overblown concepts, but this album attempts none of that. It just feels like the core conceit of this album is to just put a bunch of tracks in his usual style together for fun because it's what he enjoys doing, and it isn't trying to pretend it's going any further than that. And after hearing so many projects in this style that think they're going to blow your mind despite relying on all the exact same tricks that everyone else is using, I do actually find this lower stakes approach and attitude pretty refreshing in and of itself. And of course, that's not to say this project is half-baked or feels any less complex in its sound design or meticulously constructed than anything else he's put out. This still lives up to pretty much everything you'd want out of an album of Hudson Lee just doing his thing, and he still very much understands that impressiveness isn't the be-all and end-all when it comes to this kind of material, making sure that all these tracks' core fundamentals are enjoyable on their own. He also gets every track to seamlessly segue into the next as a continuous mix to make sure the project feels all the more cohesive, and to prevent any of these tracks from feeling skippable. Also, to make sure the project is all the easier to replay, he freaking knocks the opener out of the park. Axon is an excellent little 6-minute journey through lush synth progressions that sounds really striking and gorgeous right from the get-go. Every second has something to draw in your attention, it's paced beautifully with intriguing build-ups and epic payoffs, and I love everything about it. And while none of the other tracks here quite reach the same heights of the opener, that has to be my favorite track in the bunch, he certainly keeps delivering the gems from there. The blocky blasts of melodic noise that characterize blank walls, that didn't stick out to me much at first, but definitely grew on me. Also, it segues so well out of the opener, I often don't even notice we're on a different track until like a minute or two in. The long return, meanwhile, delivers all the hallmarks of Hudson Lee's sound I've come to expect and do get me pretty excited with its chopped-up electric pianos and barely present vocal chops. Creates that kind of laid-back groove that works so well on moments from his last album like Paper Dreams and Subside, and that kind of thing, while not feeling like a direct copy of them either. It should also not come as much of a surprise that all three of the tracks here with guest features are pretty easy highlights. Soul Arcs with False Noise does unsurprisingly feature the harsher and brighter synth tones you'd expect out of a False Noise track, but it's also, unsurprisingly, more laid back and lower energy than that guy's solo stuff. May not be the same level of a gut punch as, say, Way of Thought was, but still blends their style super well, manages to hit that perfect balance of being epic and imposing, but also kind of chill at the same time, and features a lot of nice progressions and melodies through its 5.5-minute running time. Staring Up with Alexander Panos, meanwhile, is probably the closest this album gets to being poppy. Well, you know, not super catchy or hooky or that kind of thing. It features a lot of bright and happy auto-tune sounding vocals and lots of blasting melodies that ebb and flow and give the track a much more uplifting and sugary feel that none of the other tracks here do. Even if, like all the other tracks here, it does have a lot of shifting progressions, and some sections of this thing feel more like singing over a happier version of a Tim Hecker ambient piece or something. And of course the title track with Frequent is just as good as you'd expect. Probably features the most stylistic variety within any one individual track, I guess. Ranging from minimal IDM progressions over expansive shifting pads, low-key guitars and pianos, crashing glitchy sections that seem to zip all over the place and deconstruct themselves right in front of you. Though all of it makes for, I guess, a more laid-back experience on average than, say, their previous collab Windows. It was absolutely excellent moment there. Now, as great as the tracks with guest features are, Hudson does still prove that he has quite a bit of versatility even without his guests as well, juxtaposing the brutal alien dubstep wubs and epic walls of noise on Chasm with the much more laid-back, piano-focused, and even borderline jazzy Skin, which also has a pretty nice outro that I think he sings on himself. Both of these tracks were pretty consistent favorites. That said, I also did kind of feel like the album started to run out of steam a bit in its second half and deliver a bunch of tracks that didn't really stick with me as much as the stuff from the first half. For instance, Reanimate, that kind of felt like a bit of a rehash of something like The Long Return. Tried to put a more energetic spin on it, I guess, but the way it chopped up those electric pianos, especially in the beginning, it was a bit too similar to other tracks he'd already done and felt less original to me. Nothing to Fear had some beautiful ambient sections with all these reverb-covered guitar sounds, but the harsher and noisier drop sections weren't as attention-grabbing and didn't really gel as well together with the quieter parts as other moments here like Chasm could pull off. Anti-Alignment was a nice little moment of ascending guitar and synth progressions that even got marked as a favorite at one point, but I don't know if I'd call that one of the more memorable cuts here either. I also didn't think much of the closer, Embrace, honestly. While its mix of pianos and processed humming vocals does still hit a nice emotional note to close the project out, and that whole outro of ambient pads and noise was a nice touch as well, it didn't feel like the most emotionally impactful moment on here either, and kinda paled in comparison to the Frequent collab it immediately followed. Certainly a serviceable ending, but not nearly as strong or satisfying as the way this thing started. All these lower points are still really good tracks, mind you. If I heard them out of context, they'd still work in all the same ways any other Hudson Lee material would. But I do have to mark them down when other moments here could deliver on similar ideas and do them better. Perhaps, unfortunately, the lack of new ideas and less impactful moments near the end like these prevent me from being able to say that I properly love Reflex Angle as a complete whole, but I still had a lot of fun with this project, and it remained easily replayable this whole time. And even if this is a point that would bother me on other albums, I don't actually mind that he's not doing anything new or trying to reinvent the wheel here either. I mean, I would have been legit shocked if this album hit for me on the same level as Headspace's. That is such a high bar to follow up on, and it's probably for the best that he didn't even try to recapture that experience to, relieve himself of that pressure. And even if I don't think this project quite crosses over to the 8 range for me personally, and a part of me wishes he could have done even more to evolve his sound than he already did, and maybe a part of me was hoping for something a bit larger scale, I don't know. But this was still well executed enough where if Hudson decided that this was just going to be his MO from now on, and he wanted all his subsequent albums from here on out to sound exactly like this, make a formula out of it, I don't think I'd actually mind. Fact remains, he got such a well-textured and sonically complex experience that seamlessly blends super hard-hitting and more delicate textures and got something that clearly took a high baseline level of effort to feel effortless. As if he could make total gems without even trying. And I think that's pretty impressive in its own right. So, overall, I'm feeling a very strong 7.7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon, it's in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.